Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichet. We have a very special guest on this local episode. He's the founder of the Hoop Ball website. That's hoop-ball.com, which is an incredible up-and-coming site for NBA updates and all of your fantasy basketball needs. His name is Aaron Bruski, and we're excited to talk all things Pelicans with him today.
Hey everybody, so just to give you a little bit of background here, I actually met Aaron Bruski a few years ago. I went on one of his podcasts, the Cos and Brew Show. He had gone on a former podcast that I had done, a guy who covers the NBA and probably watches more basketball than just about anybody you'll meet. And Bruski, just for your purposes, I wanted you to know why we brought you on. We were looking for someone to kind of give us an objective assessment of where we are. There's a lot going on in Pelicans land right now, and just kind of wanted to see it from someone who doesn't have somewhat biased eyes. So, welcome on, and we're glad to have you.
I'll try to bring my lack of biasness to this conversation. Looking forward to it. It's good to talk with you guys.
Aaron, let's talk about David Griffin. You had some really nice things to say when the Pelicans hired him as the vice president of basketball ops. In fact, you tweeted the following: "As for David Griffin, it takes about 2 seconds of listening to him talk to know he understands the game at a very high level. The Pelicans will pivot into this next phase with a solid hire." Aaron, what specifically did you like about this move?
It was great watching Griffin on TV because we got more access to him. He's buried in Cleveland, and you never really got to hear from him in the national media. Obviously he's, around the league, so he's not like an unknown quantity or anything, but it's just refreshing to see people in player personnel or management roles get out there on TV and really just sort of scrap with the analysis side of it. So he's doing all of his NBA TV work, and I don't think I heard the guy miss on an evaluation. And what's even nicer about that is he's gone past evaluation from a general sense as he's covering these games to really getting into the X's and O's. And part of me wonders, heck, could this guy actually coach a squad? So, in the analysis world, it's really a grind. There's, only 24 hours in a day. I just mentioned this in a tweet about the first, second, and third NBA teams. If you're a media person and you have to vote for this stuff and you've got media responsibilities, if you're on TV, you're prepping all week and you're doing all this different stuff, it's really hard to stay tied in to what's going on the floor. And that requires watching film. That requires following a bunch of writers that you trust so you can have eyes in all these different places. And we do a lot of that over at Hoop Ball because we're heavily focused on the fantasy and the gaming side. So, there's people that are taking our recommendations and, they're either winning or losing based on those recommendations. So we have a lot of pressure on us to actually understand what's going on the court. And it's kind of the same for general managers as they get out there and, their evaluations are going to end up being what they actually do. It's actually real GMing. So for him, to be out there mixing it up the way that he has and really just showing an extreme knowledge of the game. And I always measure, not to get long-winded about this, but I always measure, like, what do people know about the 12th man on, a small market team, that's not getting any coverage for whatever reason now, like the Phoenix Suns say. And the people in the game that are really making moves, they do know that stuff. And there are a lot of GMs or decision makers in front offices that don't even have any idea, where that next diamond in the rough is coming from, mostly because of nepotism and mostly because of, or not necessarily nepotism, but just sort of favoritism in the way that these jobs get doled out. So the cream rises to the top, and New Orleans is all of a sudden a player.
Let me ask you this, Aaron, because you're speaking pretty highly about Griffin, and he's been out of the game for a little while. Do you think this was a timing issue? Do you think he saw an opportunity? What do you think brought him basically to the Pelicans?
Yeah, I think it's a really unique thing with ownership passing, through to Gayle. I think that the organization is pivoting. It really feels that way from the outside looking in. You have the talk around the league is that this is a football organization that sort of just happens to run a basketball team as well. And I think with the Anthony Davis situation being passed sort of into Gayle Benson's lap, and the league as a whole sort of like saying, all right, well, let's just rip this guy away from the Pelicans. The people had him traded forever, and sort of just didn't give any sort of credit to the idea that the Pelicans could make this work. And there are many reasons to believe that. The Dell Demps stuff was really tough to swallow throughout the years, various transactions that he made. But then the Lakers came in with Clutch and with Anthony Davis's representation, and they really tried to strong arm Gayle, and she just said no. And I think there was a pivot at that point in time organizationally where she said, you know what, we're not going to be a laughing stock anymore. And so let's go out there and let's get let's tell the Lakers to go to hell and let's get the best that we can get out there. And that is what's been opening up eyes around the league, is that Griffin would accept the job, for one. And, now some of this stuff that's happening, especially the serendipity of the first pick, but you're starting to see quality people attracted to the organization. And that in of itself bodes well.
Pelicans have made some new hires lately. We brought in trainer Aaron Nelson, who's highly regarded in the industry. And obviously we just hired Pelicans' new GM, Trajan Langdon. Aaron, can you kind of speak to them and what they mean to the organization and how David Griffin has been able to recruit those guys to the Pelicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Langdon in particular, he's not like a superstar that, is just like every team in the league is knocking on his door and wants to bring him on, but he's a name. He's somebody that has been on the radar as a guy that can move up within the league. And this is a great spot for him to sort of cut his teeth and to continue to make that name. So that and, the trainer, you're seeing this turn into the beginnings of an organization that free agents would want to actually, consider. I think that is a loaded statement, where free agency and small markets and teams with new owners that have previously been thought of as places that you don't want to be, there's a lot of different stuff that goes into that. I mean, like Zion's not going to go play in Europe because he doesn't want to play in New Orleans, and team and players aren't, just skipping New Orleans just in general. I think that they're, when you start getting into that stuff, you got to be a little bit careful. But on the other side, when you have an organization that's brought in these names and you do have the assets that you have, it's quite a stroke of luck for you guys that everything's turned out this way. Because I think a lot of people before Benson passed, I think a lot of people had serious questions about whether or not this team could even stay in New Orleans, long term. So those questions I think have been asked and answered. But you get the top guy, you get David Griffin, and now you're cooking with gas because these other guys will follow him, knowing that he's not going to go somewhere that he doesn't believe in.
Yeah, and you had mentioned sort of the serendipity about getting the number one pick. I mean, just to give you a little reference point, Nick and I were both pretty elated about it. Certainly not something that we expected to happen twice in, 7 or 8 years, is to get the number one pick with not even that great of odds. But I wanted to ask you, generally speaking, about the lottery, because this is something that was obviously a hot topic. I mean, do you think that the new lottery structure accomplished what it was supposed to in terms of anti-tanking? It's there's like, you cut the league into thirds and you got those 10 teams at the bottom that know they're not competing and maybe even just happy to sniff the playoffs for the first half of the season. Those folks aren't going to change their trajectory just because of the flattened lottery odds. So there's just like levels to this conversation. I think that there's going to be sort of a correction in the market. So like, you got a lot of pub when the Sixers look like they were just really rising fast and having the trust the process, was getting just heralded on the internet everywhere. And everybody said, hey, you know what, you got to just rip the Band-Aid off and go for a full-fledged tank. Look at Philly. It's working for them. And, Sam Hinkie's now, sort of like a martyr god. That's not going to be the case anymore. You're seeing Philly struggle. They sort of mortgaged 10 years in order to do this. And, that may or may not work out for them. We'll see how things go with them in free agency, during the summer. I do not think you're going to see a lot of teams that look at
tanking outright as a feasible solution. When you do see something like this happening, a lot depends on draft. The actual players that are drafted. If you see these years where there's like 15 players that come out of the top 20 picks that are all sort of like this last season, they're all really good prospects. High hopes for all of them. Some of them come in and produce right away. You still might see, after a season like that, teams get excited about being in the top 10 to 15 players. However, this year is not one of those years. So, it's a moving target. And I recall, was it 2 seasons ago when everybody thought the draft was going to be terrible, and then it turned out being pretty good. So I think tanking is just this, it's a really sort of a niche-y thing where if you're a team and that you're not going to be in it, you can start making moves earlier in the season, almost like a preemptive tank, and then figure out kind of from there what you want to do. How do you want to play? You might even at that point in time play to win games down the stretch because you have a young core and you're trying to teach them how to win, and you're not as concerned because of those flattened odds.
Right, and the Pelicans didn't have to tank too badly in order to land the number 1 overall pick. And speaking of that number 1 pick, a lot of people have varying opinions on Zion Williamson, spanning from, he's the next superstar the moment he steps on the court, to those that are saying he's overrated and I'd rather Ja Morant. Assuming he lands in New Orleans, do you think Zion's going to live up to this hype, or do you kind of have lower expectations of him than most do?
As somebody that watches a lot of film, when I see his film, I just sort of pick my jaw up off the ground. And then this is sort of like, because you just don't know a lot of where the ceiling ends. He's got all of the same tools. Camp there. Probably. I can see why people are going to try to push back on that. And for what it's worth, Ja Morant's very good. So he's by no means, I think there's actually a discussion because of how good Morant is. There's a discussion for sort of like, okay, if you are New Orleans and you say, well, this is a sort of transcendent player that people are looking at, what could you get for that? And then go take Ja Morant if you can in that scenario, and you might pocket a seriously good asset. So I think that actually does have to be evaluated. I'm sure David Griffin's doing that right now. But as it goes for Zion, we're just talking about a skill, strength, speed, vertical shooting, touch combination that just, it kind of reminds me of when we looked at Anthony Davis, and he wasn't anywhere near as heralded coming out of school, but there were indicators statistically where you looked at it and you said, well, this guy, he could change the game. And we've seen the league change prior to him showing up, but like just statistically, defensively, you just looked at some of these numbers and said, wow, this is probably him at his low point, and he's just going to keep getting better. And that's sort of the same thing that we're looking at with Zion. I think he's shooting roughly 135% from the field. It's pretty crazy. Nobody can stop him. And especially with the league gone small, I don't know how you're going to cover him. There's a couple 4-5s out there, but very few that have the length and the strength to be able to move him off of a spot and to try to contain him. So, yeah, I'm all in on Zion, as you can tell.
Well, let me ask you this about him. As you talked about sort of the matchup issues that he creates, but do you think that he's someone? Schmitz said he might be a small ball 5 at the end of it all. Do you think that he's a 4? Do you think he's a 5? Do you think that it doesn't matter?
I think you could play him 3 through 5. I think you really just have options at that point. And I think a small ball 5 is easy because the shooting touch is already there. There aren't going to be guys that can go through him, and he can elevate. So you've covered the 5 position right there. He might have some trouble with like the Brook Lopez's of the world or players that have really high release points that he just can't get to for whatever reason. But those are going to be the outliers. I like anything that puts pressure on the defense or even the offense. But I just like the configurations that are just going to put the other team in a pickle. So when I say like putting him at the 4, for instance, I feel like that's going to let a lot of teams off the hook. But he can play all 3 of these positions. I'd be looking for configurations where some poor 3 has to guard him somehow, and that's not really going to happen either, because the teams are going to take their best sort of like 4 or 5 player that they have, and they have to defend him that way, because if you put a small ball 3 or even just a light 3 that teams are calling their 3, they're getting 32 minutes a game to this sort of a 2-3 player. If you put that guy on him, he's just not going to last longer than 5 minutes. So the other team will put a 4-5 on him and, basically pray at that point. And that's going to be fascinating. So I'll call him a small ball 5, and we'll go with Schmitzy.
Yeah, and I really haven't seen a player. I mean, he talked about, so with the way that NBA is trending and moving towards the perimeter, I think, just personally speaking, I think this is somewhat objective, but I also have a bias towards these players. But having players who can actually punish switches, I think is somewhat rare, especially in the post. And I think when you get a guy like Zion, who you're saying you can put him anywhere 3 through 5, I mean, there are not a lot of positions. If it's one guy who can defend him on the floor, that's great. But I mean, you're not going to have 2 or 3. So what do you do if he's the roller? Like, what do you do? Do you switch? I mean, what if he has a good ball handler going on a pick and roll with him? It's something that I haven't seen. I just haven't seen a player who scored as much as he did in college, as efficiently as he did. I don't know if there is a precedent, honestly. And that's with Durant and Davis and a lot of other just extremely good scorers. And we talked about it last podcast. I don't know that he's going to become exactly that, but it's at least a good statistical indication that there's something there that's really good. And I wanted to ask you, because you had actually mentioned for a second, you had said basically the Pelicans have some options moving forward because of how good Ja Morant is. So just help me out here. So if you put on your GM cap right now, like, what are you doing with the Pelicans? Because there are a lot of avenues we could take.
So I'll just be right up front with listeners. I don't do draft research until the playoffs are over. So any comprehensive, look at kind of the 5 through 15, and beneath, I'm not there yet. So I think what I would be trying to do in New Orleans' position is trying to figure out who would trade up, what are they willing to give, and then where can I also fall back in the draft and still get somebody I like. This scenario of being able to say, get the 2 pick, that's really sort of incumbent upon a lot of different things happening. So I don't think that's like, we'll just put it down on paper and pen. That's our strategy. We're going to make that happen. Like, that would require a lot of moving parts to work in their favor. But where could you get a pick, in the top 5 and still get a guy you like, or in the top 10 and still get a guy you like, while also reaping the rewards? And you don't necessarily have to get a pick back in this draft, but you are a young team that's trying to develop. The reward for getting, if you're a team that's wherever you're at in the draft and you're able to move up into the number 1, territory there, you're giving up a haul. There's probably multiple first round picks involved, probably young players on good contracts that are involved. So, I mean, you could reshape your team with the right combination of assets out there. So which teams out there that are really looking to take that kind of a shot? It's extremely hard to say. It's not going to be a lot of teams that are sort of like currently well constructed and are competing in the playoffs or for championships. It's not going to be in that realm. It's going to be somebody that's probably, smaller market, looking to take a shot, looking to make some waves with openings at those types of positions. And so the list narrows down, I think, in that regard. And you'll hear, pretty loudly teams that are interested in that. But this also filters into free agency, where you have the Anthony Davis situation, you've got Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and those situations are actually going to control a lot of what you see happen in the draft. A lot of those decisions will get made behind closed doors, and you'll start to see the impacts of those decisions get made. And then at that point in time, I think you'll see the trade market within the draft start to heat up. And I think we're also just a little bit too early for GMs to start tipping their hands with what they want to do in that market. I'd say within the next 2 weeks is when we start to see movement on all of the different fronts. And a lot of it will come down to how the Warriors do in the finals as well. And if Kevin Durant comes back and plays and he's a part of that, if he sits the sidelines, he's not a part of it. What does that do to his decision-making process with what he wants to do? So much can go on there. But as far as Morant goes, yeah, this guy's a baller. He's going to make plays at the NBA level, and he's going to be a solid pick at number 2, for whatever team ends up, selecting him. And that gives you at least an option to look at. I think if you are the Pelicans and you come out of this draft without one of those 2 players, though, I think unless you get just a great haul in whatever the trade for Zion would be, I think you're just kind of overthinking it. Zion's a guy that you can build around for years. Just make the pick.
Right. I wouldn't support really any trade even for Morant. I know a lot of people think that he's going to be a really good player, but I do kind of see Zion as a generational talent here. And based on the reactions that Alvin Gentry had when he was in the room when they found out they had the number 1 overall pick, I think he knew pretty much exactly what he wanted there, and that was Zion Williamson. I don't disagree with you that we could probably get a king's ransom for the pick, but I think that the Pelicans, they'll do their due diligence. Every smart team at least is going to put out feelers there and listen to offers. You don't want it to be a part of these stubborn teams that is like, oh, I'm not trading him for anything. There's everyone's available for a price, but I do think in the grand scheme of things, the most likely scenario is that Pelicans do end up with Zion Williamson. I want to piggyback off Michael's question, though, about putting yourself in the shoes of the Pelicans front office here, except I'm going to bypass the draft here because I'm actually just like you, Aaron. I don't start preparing for the NFL draft, which is like my favorite thing ever. I don't start preparing until the playoffs are done. So I want you to put yourself in the Pelicans front office shoes for Anthony Davis. I know you mentioned that you may have to wait to see how the draft plays out, maybe even getting close to the draft, maybe even seeing free agency to see where Kyrie Irving and Durant pan out. But if you were the GM right now, what would be your inclination on what to do with Anthony Davis? Would you want to be trying to keep him, or would you be looking to trade him for assets here?
I'm looking to move him, and here's why. And I'm almost sure David Griffin sees this. The film hasn't been kind to Anthony Davis. So when we talk Anthony Davis, we're talking about one of the best players in the league, and somebody that kind of came into the league with this enormous ceiling, and he's acted on that for the most part. So this isn't a bag on Anthony Davis thing, but he has gotten bigger and heavier as the years have gone on, and the defensive impact has not been as great as it could be if he was lighter, and he has taken on a lot of bumps and bruises. I mean, the running joke in the fantasy gaming space is that he leaves the game every night, multiple times per night, returns, and from an injury standpoint, he's actually been pretty lucky recently. Hasn't had any major stuff go down, but the odds aren't great that he continues to play at a high level defensively to justify, say, valuing him in a top 5, top 10 position. And right now, I think people say, yeah, the way he handled himself there wasn't smart. So I think, that's some of what you're seeing in the voting for all NBA teams. But I think by and large, most people still view him as a top kind of 5 player in the NBA. And so with that, you're going to get a haul back. And the fear would be, so let's say they play this out, because that's some of the scenarios that you've seen, talked about, is that they wait and sort of, he gets back on the court, which sounds crazy, but they just sort of keep going with this until they find the deal that they like. Problem with that is he's going to keep putting down film that shows a player that's heavier, that's not covering as much ground defensively. You're going to see blocking. Or he could
get hurt again.
Yeah, he could get hurt. I mean, I try to avoid that one because it's the big what if. But yeah, no, that's absolutely right. But just peak value is what you want to get out of him, and I think you could do that right now. And looking at the salary cap for these guys, I mean, you really just have a clean slate. You got Drew, you got Zion coming in, and you can sell this, to other free agents that would want to come in and really just this hard reset that you're going to see here. I mean, they could be players for big time free agents as soon as like now, really.
Right.
So I think, the time is now to move Anthony Davis.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask too. So, I mean, you're talking about moving Davis. So Nick and I, just to give you a little context, are certainly on board with that. Because, I mean, you're talking about the injuries and you're also talking about his long-term value. We're just as worried about the fact that he doesn't seem to be invested here, which, again, it's not like he has to be in love with the place, but he could easily walk in a year. I mean, if you're looking at the packages that have been thrown out there, Tatum and the Celtics package, if that's still there, New York and whatever they put together around that pick, I mean, what are you looking for? The Lakers, I should mention the Lakers too. Like, which one stands out to you, or what are your general thoughts on all that stuff?
Oh man, I think Boston is going through their own unique thing where Kyrie Irving tried to be a leader and couldn't pull it off, and basically tanked a season for them because nobody wanted to work with that guy. So if you're Boston and you've been looking at that and you're going, well, we don't really know if Kyrie's a guy we want to build around going forward, or if he even wants to be with us, I would think Boston sort of cools off on offering those guys. Tatum, I said this when he came into the league and I backed off of it because he looked so good, but I thought his rookie year was going to be his best year. And so now that almost looks like a good evaluation of him. He's got to do more to get stronger and develop a more well-rounded game. And then defensively, he needs to kind of up his game to be considered this higher this higher level asset that you would talk about in an Anthony Davis deal. But Jaylen Brown is a guy that you should absolutely be interested in if you're a fan of any team. But I don't know that Boston's going to want to bring those guys, or pardon me, to offer those guys, because that could be the future, for them going forward. So I think New York is really, you're hoping that if you're a Pelicans fan that Anthony Davis could be, flipped for their pick. And I kind of wonder with the Lakers stuff, I do think that's pretty dead. I think that first of all, you don't even know who you're dealing with over there. Second of all, like, what a show they've been. And, I bet Gayle Benson's like, yeah, just don't deal with them, and I don't know that they're going to bring back players that you guys necessarily want to hitch your wagons to. It's funny in the NBA. It's not even like, is a player good enough? It's the opportunity cost of attaching yourself to that player for 2 to 3 years. So, if it's Brandon Ingram, is this really the guy that you want to build around? Because you kind of got to treat him like a superstar if you think he's the guy and you bring him in. So all those packages from the Lakers, I don't think interest me if I'm in your guys' position. But New York, if they can sweeten the deal somehow enough to make it competitive, Anthony Davis for like, what's New York picking right now? 5th, 4th, third. They're third.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard good things about Barrett, so I feel like maybe that's at least in the ballpark of something you guys should consider. But I think you guys can get way more. I think you guys can get a first-round pick. I think you guys can get a good young player, in the range of a Jaylen Brown. But this is where you guys you need something to sort of shake out in your favor, because I think the market is a little bit depressed right now from the picks you can get standpoint, and also the players that are available, to be sent back in that kind of a deal. So look for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Once they get sorted out, I think those other teams will emerge.
The offer that keeps getting thrown around, or that I keep reading about at least, from the Knicks is the number 3 overall pick, which I would assume the Pelicans would take R.J. Barrett, not just because of his skill set, but also because, he was roommates with Zion Williamson, and they have a relationship at Duke, and I think that would make your star happy. But you have R.J. Barrett, 3rd overall pick, and then the Knicks would be sending Kevin Knox, who they picked last year early, and then Dennis Smith Jr., as well as center Mitchell Robinson. Do you think that the Pelicans could get more than those 4 kind of young guys? I know that they all possess pretty high ceilings, I would say, but I also don't think you're getting enough proven ability there in terms of what they've produced on the court so far in their young careers. What do you think about that offer?
Yeah, I think that's a dog-a deal. Like, I don't think that's enough for you guys. Barrett, like a lot of people whose opinions I respect are like, yeah, he's solid. You don't worry about him. But I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about as a 3 pick. You don't worry about him. We're not saying he's going to be a transformative player or he's going to be, a bona fide all-star every year. We're beneath that threshold when we talk about him. And the other guys you mentioned, like Kevin Knox, he's young. He's got a lot of ways that he can improve. Did not see something in him last year that you would really get excited about, long term about what he can be. Mitchell Robinson, I mean, they cut him loose and said, just go block a bunch of shots. Like, so he had these gaudy block totals, and a legit, prospect. You get excited about him in general, but he's probably the best of the group there. Dennis Smith Jr., his knee issues alone would be red flags, but really it's the fit. He had trouble coming into the league with working with other teammates, and you saw him struggle to make it work in Dallas. And so he didn't exactly take off in New York either. I think there's a lot of concerns there. So, yeah, no, that deal doesn't strike the muster for me. I would want something else in addition. I would want Robinson, the 3 pick, and then something else in addition to make that even worth talking about.
What do you think that addition could be?
Yeah, maybe future first, but, teams hold on to those and almost even overweight them, so much that I don't know that New York will, be able to perform in that respect. But you could look at teams that are trying to get rid of neutral assets that are, younger players on decent deals that just don't fit their build at this current time and try to somehow bring them into a deal. So you could solidify a veteran, or a younger player that can accelerate the timetable. Because the biggest thing I think you want to show free agents is that, hey, we got a chance of winning, or we got a chance of moving the needle here. We're seeing it locally here in Sacramento. When you look at it, you go, okay, we got Fox, Hield, and Bagley. We're competitive probably for the next 5 years. Come join us. It's a compelling pitch. Right now you'd have Drew, Zion, and you need like one more guy that can really on a night-to-night basis gobble up 35 minutes and be very good. Now you got, free agents look at that and they say that's good.
Yeah, maybe Julius Randle, Elfrid Payton will re-sign and, I don't know, be somewhat of an attraction here. But it's tough. I mean, we're sitting here talking about the 3 most likely teams that everybody considers to be trade partners for Anthony Davis, and we're shooting down the possibility of the Lakers. You didn't shoot down the possibility of the Celtics, but you were kind of cooler on it than most people seem to be. And the Knicks, the most popular package that I keep reading about at least, is a dog trade according to you. So things need to happen, really, and it's kind of tough to predict really what's going to happen with Anthony Davis, and it might lead to the Pelicans not getting an offer that they're really sold on. And then you kind of start talking about the situation where you just brought up, where you don't really want him to step on the court again, as a Pelican at least. So it's a tougher situation to trade an all-star like Anthony Davis. I guess not this year, but a former all-star like Anthony Davis. It's a tougher situation than it would seem,
It's wild because it's all pinned on 2 guys who, Kyrie and Kevin Durant to set the marketplace. You got these, Kyrie thinks the world is flat, and to each their own. He's just a really unique cat. And then you got Kevin Durant, who's liable to take a guy with 10 Twitter followers to task on Twitter for calling him out. How do you really game plan this stuff? I think it was Stein who said the other day that he had one thought about Kevin Durant's free agency, and now he's like, I don't know what I think anymore, because I think only Kevin Durant and his business manager know.
So I have one more question before we wrap up here, Aaron. So, you talked about the coverage that you're doing at Hoop Ball for the NBA playoffs. What do you think? Typically the playoffs will reveal something about the way that the NBA is going. Is there anything that stands out to you? I know you said there's kind of a cluster, with Durant going wherever, and Kyrie is obviously out now, and LeBron's not even in the playoffs. But, I mean, is there anything that you've seen in this playoffs that would shape the way that you would build a team or whatever moving forward?
Can you find a Giannis? Can you find a Giannis defender? I think the league. What was interesting to me is that you're seeing guys like James Harden, who have been viewed as like he's been called like the greatest offensive player, for a while. You're seeing what happens when those teams don't have a strong foundation, and players like James Harden are not challenged the right way to see the game of basketball the way that some of the league's best see the game of basketball, and between that, I think when you find players that are like a Giannis, who are just all about winning, no matter what, the ego's dropped at the door. I think there's going to be more of a value on that because I think you're going to see there's just a lot of recent history of when those kinds of players, the KDs, the Russell Westbrooks, they've been expected to win championships and they haven't been able to, produce, outside of the case of KD joining the Warriors. I think you're going to see a premium when we look back at Steph and Clay and Dre with the way they play the game and some of these other guys that are higher profile guys not getting it done. I think you see a higher profile on high IQ. I think that the 3-point shot is going to continue to sort of vex the league. I think that you'll see something over the summer to stop the side-to-side 3-point attempts that draw fouls and some of the stuff that we saw this last summer with them coming around the screen because the game has really suffered from that standpoint. But now when you bring Giannis and Zion into the mix, I think now you've got a real challenge for teams that think that they can just go small and that the 3-point shot is the solution to all their ills. So it's a copycat league. Things sort of swing on a pendulum. I think you're going to see a swing back towards size and athleticism, sort of the way that when Shaq joined the league, everybody just couldn't deal with it. They had to figure out, okay, how do we actually defend this? You can't put a small ball 4 on Giannis. You're seeing it happen right now in Toronto with Pascal Siakam, who many thought, hey, this is a guy who can defend the 4. He's kind of a prototypical 4, and this is how we're going to roll. You just can't do that with a guy that's that physically strong. Zion will exasperate that trend, and I think the people making decisions around the league are probably going to back off a little bit on some of this 3-point shooting trend that you're seeing in going small, because there's going to be 2 examples in their face that are going to make it not work.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't believe I thought Giannis would be really good in the playoffs, but I didn't realize how dominant he would continue to be. I always am a little bit suspect of younger players who are, I mean, he's done well in the playoffs before, but making that sort of leap, I mean, it's crazy, man. I just haven't seen, we talked about Zion being sort of a unique person that we haven't really seen before. Giannis is the same way. I don't know how you defend that, because all he has to do is throw his shoulder into you and then palm the ball, and he's dunking on you almost every play. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us, Aaron. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back at some point. So, guys, follow him at...
it's Aaron, Aaron, Bruski, Bruski on Twitter. You can follow us at Hoopball Tweets on Twitter, and the website's hoop-ball.com. And if you get a chance, I got to plug my guy Panda. Mike Passador is writing some excellent Toronto Raptors coverage, breaking down all the X's and O's in a way that's easy and fun to read. But if you read this stuff, you will definitely be way smarter about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. You're extremely knowledgeable, and the content you gave us was great. And you kind of talked earlier about how it takes a great GM to know that 12th man in the lineup for each team. But I can kind of tell that you talk about every team the way you just talked about the Pelicans tonight. So very impressive, and thank you so much for coming on. And it kind of speaks to what you're creating on the Hoop Ball website, and that you can go through each team like this and have this amount of knowledge for every team. So we really support what you're doing at Hoop Ball. Everyone needs to go check it out. It's an amazing website, and it will help with your fantasy basketball team and with NBA updates all around. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. We look forward to having you back in the future.
I appreciate those kind words, and I look forward to being back on anytime.
And that'll wrap up this week's local episode. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks again to Aaron Bruski, who was a phenomenal guest in this week's episode. You got to check out his website, hoop-ball.com, for all of your NBA updates and fantasy basketball needs. If you like what you heard today, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can follow us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends, hoot at, and take flight.